September 27th, 2018. A couple of days ago, I had a conversation with someone who is a person of potentially far-reaching influence in terms of enabling fundamental change processes, partially with money, but also with connections to people who could make communications flow a lot easier. And it kind of got me to that point of asking this question of what if we suddenly got to a point where, because of imminent runaway catastrophic climate change that we're actually already in the middle of, and this little window of opportunity to pull back from the brink of an unraveling climate system, but if you look at it from the perspective of a human species that wants to survive in a relatively stable climate into many millennia of future and not just a few centuries of decline, then sooner or later, for one reason or another, the people who are holding on to financial capital for other reasons or still trying to accumulate it will very quickly move towards liberating funds for deeply transformative change. And I think we're at the brink of people really wanting to invest in this idea of ecosystems restoration, this idea of societal and ecological regeneration, and this vision of redesigning the human presence on Earth in such a way that we become healers of the planet, that we increase and pay attention to planetary health. I think moving from talking about sustainability to really wanting to restore and regenerate is a change in the conversation that is still gaining strength, and that unites people who talk about regeneration as the path to a flourishing and thrivable future, whatever you want to name it. But there's a growing group of people that work actively towards catalyzing this change. And yet, the organizational structures, like the institutions, the NGOs, the players in this field, are also stuck within the current economic system and limited funds to do what they're trying to do. So the many organizations that I've been involved in all had a little bit of a dance between what would we do if we had unlimited funds, and what is it that we can actually do, and how are we going to get the funding for it, and do we need to shift our communications from this word to that word, or include this agenda because that's what's fundable right now, and we can drive our overall mission and vision by joining in with these currents. And so that has guided a lot of strategic decision making in these organizations. And then these organizations also, while deeply believing, I think the people in them want to collaborate and want to reach out and see the synergies and the potentials. But again, the limitation of funding in the organization sometimes actually drives the organization to make decisions that are somewhat competitive with other organizations. And then you look at prizes or grant money, you suddenly have all these people who are doing wonderful work compete against each other in order to get some of these funds. And I've had this conversation with people in the Buckminster Fuller Institute and also with the Lush Spring Prize about how do we move away from prizes that ultimately still are zero-sum and create winners and losers to a system of challenges and growing a community of exchange and growing a learning community and a communications platform and an entry point for funders to get to know fundable projects, and in such a way build a non-zero-sum ecosystem of challenges that are getting people inspired to be active or getting people rewarded for having already been active in a certain aspect of regeneration. And so this all brings me to this big what if question. Suddenly the funds were there, And all these organizations that in some cases have 30, 40, 50-year track records of working for positive change and have their networks, their education systems, their pilot projects and their successes and their failures. All these projects, if they suddenly all got together and said, how are we going to deploy the necessary capability and knowledge, the ability to communicate, the ability to plan and design, the ability to do regional assessments and work together with everybody in your region on re-regionalization of production and consumption and local resilience building, restoration of local ecosystems, local watersheds. That is a massive task just in terms of capacity building and education. And right now we have all these organizations that deeply have experience in contributing to this kind of education, but we don't have a plan of how they would all work together. And how do we scale their work? Because sometimes they have 10, 15 active teachers, but then they have people in their network who could teach, but who couldn't get a job because there's only that many courses, because that's all what's fundable. If all that changes, suddenly we need to really look at all the network, all that experience, regional assessments of who's got permaculture, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture experience in this biome, in this regions, in this country, in order to create supportive networks, but also create pathways for people who don't want to go to university anymore because they don't even know whether the degree that they're getting after 4 years, including a lot of debt, will actually serve them in this rapidly transforming world. When all these people want to join ecosystems restoration camps and want to join the regeneration rising and work to make the change in time so we have a flourishing 22nd century and see massive improvements by the middle and towards the end of this century, that is a massive task. And are we ready? How do we bring everyone together? How do we do these audits? How do we create pathways where people can then say, okay, I'm taking 4 years to spend some time in 2 different ecosystems restoration camps. While I do that, I take the Gaia Education Design for Sustainability online course and do the regenerative practitioner training and the story of place with Regenesis group. And how do I finance the travel? How do I have access to the internet to make sure that I can access these distance courses? All this explained, made easy, so people can see that this is a pathway which would, after 4 years, give them a huge global network of contacts of like-minded people who want to be part of the regeneration, would give them lived, embodied experiences of having been part of teams, of having been part of projects, successes and failures, seeing changes that they've worked for with their own hands in front of their own eyes, and being trained in, let's say, have a degree in, like a PDC under your belt, have a Gaia Education training of trainers under your belt so you could offer courses and become a multiplier, have holistic land management as an approach to the whole field of project management under your belt, skills in sociocracy, awareness of process-oriented psychology and the dynamics of groups. All these different possibilities that we need to have a lot more people trained up in all of this. And how do we build the networks that enable that, not just for 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 learners, but for millions all over the world? How do we link it into the school system with initiatives like Ashoka's Global Change Leaders, or Alexander Laszlo's and Pavel Lukša's and Joshua Kobista's wonderful recent report from the Global Education Futures on learning ecosystems? How do we build those learning ecosystems and enable them when the funds are flowing, when we don't have an excuse anymore that we have limiting competitive decision-making in organizations that are actually aligned in vision and mission, and we now really have green light to build the synergies and the better world that we can co-create together without these limits of funds. Because I deeply believe that there is a change afoot with the particularly the younger generation of wealthy people on the planet, that realize that there comes a point when you pass 5-10 million that you really don't need that much money in your life. And when you're past 100 or even 1,000 million, then it is a responsibility bearing down on you to activate all this money in order to bring about the positive change that might just be the one single change that will save us into the 22nd century and create that thrivable world, that more meaningful relationship with nature and with each other that we're also yearning for, that will ultimately, through giving away, become a more equitable world where people together thrive. And yeah, I better stop because this is getting long again, but I think this was a rant worth having. And to all of you out there, all these wonderful organizations that are part of the Regeneration Rising, we should start thinking and convening to explore what we would do if suddenly financial restrictions were lifted and we could actually roll out to many, many more people.